Hi, my name is Nathan Hagihara, and today I'll be running you through the causes and course of the Great War, which is my digital unit plan for EDSC 304. So on the home page here on the unit plan website, you'll find some information on the basic premise of my unit plan, which I'll run you through as we go through the presentation. This unit plan was built around the California Content Standards for Social Science for 10th grade, being the sophomore class, and it's intended to run students through California State Standard 10.5, which asks students to be able to analyze the causes and course of the First World War. The big ideas that I had for this entire unit were revolved around these 6 questions. First of all, what factors, whether they were social, economic, political, religious, ethnic, or philosophical even, led to the outbreak of World War I? Number 2, what were the major battles of the war? How did these wins or losses affect the overall feelings of the conflict? Because many people, depending on how their country fared in battle, would have their opinions of the war wave. Third, to what extent did the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917 affect the Allies? And similar to that, number 4, how significant was the role that was played by the US in World War I? Both of these events had tremendous impacts on the outbreak of World War I and the overall cause of them. Both the rise of the Soviets in 1917 and the entrance of the US in early 1917 both impacted the outcome of the war severely. Number 5, how were human rights impacted by the outbreak and end of the Great War? One notable instance that many historians are aware of is the Armenian genocide that occurred along with the Ottoman Empire's reign. So many people are aware that that is one of the biggest human rights violations on record up till that date. And lastly, to what extent did colonialism play a role during the First World War? As many people know, that was in the heyday of many different empires, and the British Empire was still at relatively strong strength at this point. So colonialism obviously will have a tremendous impact on this war, but truly, how big is that impact? And the 3 lessons are structured around these 3 student learning objectives, which go chronologically with the 3 lessons. Number 1, I hope that students will be able to understand the various factors that led to the outbreak of the First World War in Europe. I also hope that students will be able to describe the role that was played by the US, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Russia during the Great War. And then third, I hope students will be able to understand the different major operations that occurred during World War I, and understand how the ways that countries became involved in the conflict and the different major world events that occurred impacted the outcome of the war. So the first portion I want to cover are the assessments. As you can see from this poplet, which you can find on my website, there are a wide variety of different assessments that are covered under each unit. And I will briefly run through them during this presentation. Firstly are the entry-level assessments. The assessment that I provided here in the webpage is the Lesson 1 entry-level assessment. This is simply a pretest to see what students already know from either 7th grade world history or their own independent studies into the causes of World War I. As you can see, it's a simple 5-option multiple choice question. There is no immediate feedback, but this provides students maybe a way for them to be able to recall information without having to think extremely hard. There are entry-level assessments for each of our lessons, this being Lesson 1. Lesson 2 is simply going to be a quick write that asks students to recall current knowledge that they have on American involvement during the First World War. And then the third lesson, asking students to analyze as a class an image from the Armenian genocide. As a part of this unit, there are 5 formative assessments, 2 in Lesson 1, 1 in Lesson 2, and 2 in Lesson 3. In Lesson 1, the first formative assessment is the responses that students provide to comprehensive questions that are provided in the Prezi lecture. They'll be able to discuss the questions with one another through online forums and just be able to collaborate as a whole in their understanding of this lecture. The other formative assessment for Lesson 1 is the in-class writing that students will complete, which asks them to analyze the importance of 2 of the main topics and their effects on the outbreak of World War I, with main meaning militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. In Lesson 2, the formative assessment, students will use Poplet, which, similar to this graphic above, which is a Poplet in its own right, is a graphic organizer tool. Students will complete a graphic organizer that outlines the roles that either the 3 Central Powers nations played or the 3 Allied nations played in their roles on their sides of the war. In the third lesson, students will complete a Google Forms or Google Class activity that asks them to put various events in chronological order as they occurred during the first half of the First World War. Then in the second half, students will complete a simple quiz that contains both multiple choice and short free response questions that just tests them on their understanding of the events that occurred during the second half of World War I. And that will be used, that'll be using the SurveyMonkey platform. Finally are the summative assessments. For Lesson 1, I provided here the rubric for the summative assessment, which is just a short essay where students will analyze in detail the 2 largest factors in their mindsets from those 4 main causes, and their perceptions of which ones were the largest and which led to the outbreak of the First World War. They will basically complete this essay through Google Drive, through the Google Docs platform. They'll be able to collaborate with each other through a complete peer review, and then they'll be able to share it with the teacher through Google Drive. And as you can see on my website, there is the rubric available here as well. For each lesson, there is a summative assessment. For Lesson 2, students will write another essay that discusses the roles that 2 countries of their choice played in World War I, and they'll analyze how their actions impacted the course of the war. In Lesson 3, as you can see, they will create a timeline that details the major events in the war, which I'll get back to later. And then the entire unit culminates in a Prezi presentation that the students complete this time and collaborate on, where they'll detail things that they learned in this lesson and through this unit, and show their understanding and what they learned as part of this lesson plan, incorporating State Standard number 10.5. So Lesson 1 involves a Prezi lecture that I've prepared. Students will be able to download guided reading notes here that they will complete as they go through the lesson. And as you can see when you look at my website, there are basically the lecture questions on that assignment, and students are able to fill it in. There's different ways that they will go through the lecture and complete different questions as they go. As they complete those guided reading notes, they'll also find that the Prezi lecture is attached down here. Now, as you'll see on that Prezi, I have broken it down into different categories. It goes through the different overview topics of World War I, going through who were the main participants of World War I, what are the 4 quote-unquote main topics, and what are some aspects of these main topics. How did the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, who is known to be the biggest and most important short-term cause of World War I, and then those check for understanding questions. Now, as you can see, students will be captivated through the use of different YouTube videos, different questions and answers, and there's additional information available throughout the Prezi. In Lesson 2, students will complete a Weber-size. So my goal for this lesson is that students will understand the roles of each of the 5 major powers that they played throughout the outbreak of the First World War. So in this Weber-size, students will download the file that you can see on the screen right now. This web activity does provide links and guided questions for students to complete as they're running through this activity. So you can see this activity is divided into 5 sections, each based off of 1 country and 1 article. Each question, students will be able to provide a short, abbreviated answer, whether it's in a complete sentence format or on their own in their own way. All the answers are provided through those links, so students don't have to run through and find their own outside sources to use. And it does culminate in a conclusion activity, which is just a short essay, kind of like the summative essay, asking the students to compare and contrast the roles of 2 different countries on the outcome of World War I. Lesson 3 is the graphic organizer activity that I mentioned earlier. with the target being that students will understand the major events that occurred during World War I and how they impacted different people, when they occurred, why they occurred, and their overall importance to the conflict. So as you can see, we have the project instructions here. Students are given access to this article, and there are miscellaneous links available through this article. And it basically outlines the different events of World War I, provides just a brief overview of some of the statistics and information. As they run through, they'll find later on in this document the different events they have to choose to write about in their project. And as they run through these different events, they have these variety of key questions that they're asked to answer and ponder as they're trying to choose those 8 events and collect some information. This activity is done via Google Docs, so they'll use the drawing tool, make something similar to this image that you see here of a timeline that is labeled with different years. Once they've chosen their 8 activities and they have enough information to complete it, they'll begin by plotting the different events on the timeline, as you can see here, with some of them involving different images. They will then, after they've completed the actual timeline, provide just a brief explanation about the different statistics, when it occurred, which countries the event affected, and then providing some background information to this event. And some of them will include illustrations. When you scroll further down, there is a sample project here, as you can see, that basically provides an example for students to be able to use. So as you can see, some of them do include images, as I've asked students to include a minimum of 3 images on their timeline, and then all of them include the same basic title of the event and the dates and the year that they occurred. Then, on the second and third pages, they outline 4 of the 8 events that they've chosen. So as you can see here, I provided information on just 4 of the most popular ones: Franz Ferdinand's assassination, the actual outbreak of World War I, the Zimmermann telegram, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And as you can see, 3 out of the 4 of them do include illustrations that I've asked for students to do again, and just some basic information for someone who likely would not know what occurred during these different events. And at the bottom of the page, there is a rubric for students to be able to use as they complete the activity. So this has been an overview of the Causes and Course of the Great War Unit that I've written for EDSC 304. I hope you enjoy taking some time looking through this website, looking through the different resources that I've made available, and thank you for listening to my presentation.